What's up, y'all? Welcome on back to another review. It Chapter 2 might be one of the worst sequels of all time, especially in consideration of the worst horror sequel ever made. So I reviewed It Chapter 1 last week, and in that review, I mentioned that I'd only seen Chapter 2 maybe once, and that was right after it released on Blu-ray. I checked it out at home, and I remember thinking to myself, this is good, not great, especially in comparison to the first movie. And in my review of Chapter 1, I mentioned that I would be curious to know how I would feel watching it back to back with Chapter 1. So, needless to say, I do not think this is a good movie. I think this is really one of the worst sequels of all time. I don't know of a series where the second movie is as bad as It Chapter 2. Now, are there good things about this movie? Sure. I think for every right thing that they do in this movie, there's probably about 3 or 4 things that they do wrong. It's very few and far between that this movie is able to produce anything worth mentioning that is absolutely fantastic, especially in comparison to that first movie. So in order to talk about Chapter 2, I gotta go back and talk about Chapter 1. Kind of what this movie does a little bit with, in order to bring about these characters and talk about where they are 27 years later, you have to go back and see some of the missing things that we didn't get from the first movie. With Chapter 1, the big thing that I loved about that movie was the fact that the characters came first, and then they made Pennywise scary as shit. And then they brought in the atmosphere, the horror vibes, all of that to really make a modern classic horror movie. This time around, they just throw all of that to the side, and we don't get any of those moments from the first movie that made it so amazing. First off, I want to talk about the thing that was the most egregious thing about this movie. In my Chapter 1 review, I mentioned that Bill Skarsgård's performance as Pennywise has to go down as one of the most iconic horror villain performances of all time. His iteration of Pennywise was just so terrifying. He is an absolute shell of his former self. This has no comparison to the first movie. And to go from me saying that your take on this character is so iconic, so phenomenal, and then to get to the second movie and it completely disregards in terms of like all the goodwill that you did with that first movie, all of it was undone with Chapter 2. They just did not give Bill Skarsgård anything to work with in this movie. And I don't think this is, again, I don't think this is an issue for Bill Skarsgård. I don't think this has anything to do with his acting. In fact, I think there are a couple of scenes here in the movie where it gives you those vibes of the first movie, but everything else surrounding that performance is just absolute bullshit. The best scene with Pennywise in this movie was when they were at the baseball game. They were underneath the bleachers. It has the little girl, and it definitely reminded me of that scene in the first movie with him and Georgie. It was very similar in terms of his performance there, and I thought it was scary as shit. But that's really the only time that we get Pennywise being like so devious and just cunning and terrifying all at the same time. Everything else is just a CGI mess. And furthermore, with that particular scene, it really has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. So it sucks that one of the best scenes in the movie, if you cut it, I don't think you would ever miss it. I don't think that it has any bearing on whether the movie is like the plot, the characters. It doesn't make it better or worse. So if you took it out, you would never even miss it, which sucks because it was so damn good. And I really did enjoy how terrifying it was and how much it put me on the edge of my seat for that particular scene. And you just don't get that the rest of the movie. And that kind of goes into my next point of there is so much CGI here. This movie came out in 2019. Chapter 1 came out in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. The CGI in Chapter 1 was so much better. Go back to my chapter 1 review. I even mentioned that the use of special effects and CGI was actually pretty good in that movie, where I thought that the movie really did hold up in 2025. But going to chapter 2 and watching that now, it looks like absolute garbage. Everything about this movie just looks ugly. And it's just like, what what did y'all do? What happened? Who made the decisions to do all of this to chapter 2 when you had a good thing going with chapter 1? But you could have done that in a more practical way that you didn't rely so heavily on special effects. Or, I don't know, here's a thought, just make the special effects look good on top of that. Like Pennywise, he shouldn't be 99% special effects. I feel like, and again, I will defend Bill Skarsgård here. I don't think he had much to work with the script, but for the most part, I don't think he really ever does anything in this movie. It's mostly, it feels like, if I had to guess, he does more voiceover than anything, which sucks because you have the perfect casting of Pennywise with Bill Skarsgård. Now, before I jump into the actual characters of the movie, I do want to mention that this movie is almost 3 hours long. I mentioned this on the Chapter 1 review. I said that movie was just over 2 hours. I personally think that a horror movie should not be over 2 hours long. I think you lose a lot of tension. I think it makes the movie less scary. It's just very hard to keep the tension up for a horror movie for over 2 hours. I think you can tell stories, you can make it super scary, you can make the characters, like you can relate to the characters and love those characters enough in under 2 hours for it to be a really great horror movie. I mean, go out and look at all these modern day horror movies that are working with an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours long, and they're some of the best horror movies of all time. This one, almost 3 hours long. It is 30 plus minutes longer than the first movie. And honestly, I think if you cut 30, 45 minutes away from this movie, it's probably better. This is a drag of a movie. It loses its tension. Actually, I take that back. It never had tension to begin with. And that sucks because this is a horror movie. It's supposed to make you feel a certain type of way. You're supposed to be on the edge of your seat. You're supposed to have the hairs on your neck stand up in certain scenes, and you never get that here. I was never really uncomfortable with what was going on screen. It was more so I was uncomfortable from sitting in my seat for so fucking long. I do remember after like the first hour, I looked down. I'm like, man, there must be like, I don't know, 45 minutes left in this movie. No, there's another hour and a half. The pacing of this is absolutely abysmal. There is no reason, again, no reason for this movie to be 3 hours long. You can cut this shit out and trim it down to 2 hours long, and it would have been so much better. Or here's a thought, maybe you weave in some of these scenes of the older actors into part 1. I don't know. I don't know what the end all be all as to fix what these movies were trying to do. I don't know how to make that story one complete story, but I feel like there was a better way to do it than to split this up into 2 different movies. I mean, have they ever heard of that phrase, a jack of all trades is a master of none? That's what this movie is. It tries to do so much. It tries to bring in so many elements of the first movie into this one, while also incorporating the older actors along with new scares and trying to put this story and give it justice to the book. Like, they really just don't accomplish anything here and make any of it good. Which, by the way, they do split up this movie. They do flashbacks, and despite the fact that it feels like this movie is just following a repeated formula, one kid goes to a certain spot, he has a flashback, he gets his token, and then another kid goes to a spot, has a flashback, gets his token. It's rinse and repeat for over an hour of them doing this for every single kid, or adult in this case. So it feels so monotonous over the course of those 3 hours. It just, the runtime doesn't help it whatsoever, but they don't give you anything interesting in between. Now, I do want to bring up some of the characters that I liked, didn't like. Richie from the first movie was the best. I think him and Pennywise were the two best characters, or two best performances, I should say, of that movie. Bill Hader as Richie in this movie, lock. Like absolute lock. I loved Bill Hader's take on Richie throughout this movie. I thought he brought a lot of the comedy that the first movie had with Finn Wolfhard, but also kind of made it his own. And then they also gave that character some emotional stuff at the very end of the movie that I thought was really interesting. Now, I didn't catch it the first time that I watched it, but this time around, it seems like they were trying to tease at the fact that Richie is a closet gay. Um, I mean, I don't think that was really handled all that well. I don't mind that they take the character in that direction. I just think they could have done a little bit better job of kind of showcasing that throughout the entire movie. I mean, they hinted at it with his flashback, but after that, we don't really get much. And it's just like a little teases with Eddie's death at the very end. You know, he's really the one that's the most emotional about that death. But you could really kind of make the case that emotional reaction was just them being really like best friends. I mean, you go back to the first movie, them two were always kind of going back and forth, roasting each other. And to have this movie have that type of reaction, it's like, okay, well, that was his best friend, you know? He was most connected to that guy. But then you have the R plus E carving into the wood at the very end of the movie, and it's like, okay, well, were they more than that? I don't know. I don't think that was handled in the best way that it could. And speaking of Eddie, James Ransone plays him in this movie. Don't know who he is, but looks the fucking part. He looks just like his younger self. And I thought his performance was good. I enjoyed Eddie in this movie. I think they kind of skewed a little bit more towards the hypochondriac side when, if you go back to chapter 1, it seemed like that was his character arc, was getting over the hypochondria. And then I guess he just continued that for the rest of his life for 27 years. So now he's basically that same character that he was in chapter 1. So I think the actual character arc for Eddie was a little confusing. I didn't like that. But the actual performance and some of the dialogue and some of his interactions with the other characters was really good. James McAvoy as Bill, just a great performance. Absolutely great performance from him. I mean, really all the performances were great, but I really liked his take on Bill. And then you have Jessica Chastain, who is coming in for Beverly Marsh. I thought she brought a great performance to this movie as well. And then you have Jay Ryan coming in as Ben, and I don't know. I like the performance. I don't think the character side of it is very well written. I don't mind that they're continuing this thread from the first one where Beverly doesn't know that he's the one that wrote that poem. I don't mind that, but it's just like that's all his character is. For the entire movie, that is what his character is him being upset that she is again falling for Bill, and it doesn't really come full circle until the very end. So I think it just left a lot to be desired with his character in this movie. And then you have Teach Grant coming in for Henry Bowers, the bully from the first movie. Okay. I mean, what the fuck was that? You know, like, why was he even in this movie? Cut him, get rid of all those scenes. And honestly, I'm telling you, you can cut a big chunk of this movie by just cutting his ass out of the movie. I don't think he served any purpose in this movie. I'm going to be the guy that says it. I think, for the most part, it is very difficult to adapt a video game or a book into a movie. For the most part, I think you have to really move into the serialized version of those properties in order to really achieve a great adaptation of those properties. So what I mean by that is, like, look at The Last of Us, not season 2, but season 1. Look at how well that adapted the first game. I think that season should have been longer, but for the most part, it adapted that game very, very well. And it works in a serialized format. If you make The Last of Us into a movie, I don't know. So to me, it's very hard to adapt a book or video game accurately for a movie. And this one in particular, you have to cut out things of those properties to make it flow better for a movie. Cutting out Henry Bowers, the bully, I don't think it served any purpose in this movie. I don't think the movie itself changes if you take him out. The only thing that changes is the runtime is cut down, and I feel like the pacing of it would be a lot better. So get that shit out of here. And then the last thing that I want to mention about this movie, and it goes back to my opinion that it is extremely fucking ugly. So what they decided to do was not film scenes during the first movie and then incorporate those here. Like those were maybe like outtakes or extended scenes, deleted scenes, whatever, and then just incorporate them here. No, what they decided to do was bring back those child actors and film new scenes. Well, let me tell you, those actors have grown up, especially Finn Wolfhard, who, if you watch Stranger Things, that dude ages like 30 years in between, like, what, season 1 and 2? Dude ages significantly. So they decided to do that and use de-aging for these characters. It is so distracting, like, how bad that de-aging special effects are on Finn Wolfhard for all of his scenes. I would have rather them cut out all of it, or even just minimize those scenes and how much you're giving us of those characters, because it just takes me out of the movie every single time. But at the same time, you gotta look towards the plot, the character side of it, how great these scenes are, how engaging they are. And maybe if they were more engaging, I would be a little bit more forgiving over how these special effects looked. But that's not the case here. So, all in all, guys, I think this is one of the worst sequels of all time. And it's not very often that I give something, and I want to be completely upfront here. I watched this movie back in 2019 or when it first released on Blu-ray. I watched it then, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. It's not very often that I swing the pendulum in the more negative way for a movie. Yeah, usually I'll go down a little bit like, oh man, that's not as good on a rewatch as it was the first time. But it's usually like a half star, maybe a star at most. This one is, yeah, it's significantly worse than the first one. And again, this doesn't happen very often with movies that I watch. If anything, like I'll give it like 2 stars to begin with, and then I watch it a second time, and I'm like, oh, fuck, actually, that was really great. The Shining is a great example of that, where I hated it the first time that I watched it a second time earlier this year, and I absolutely fucking love that movie now. So it happens more often than not with it being more positive, but in this case, I literally hate everything about this movie. I think it does everything wrong that the first movie did right. That movie was scary, terrifying. It made me uncomfortable in a lot of situations. This movie didn't make me feel anything. And for a horror movie to make me not have any emotions whatsoever other than I'm bored, that is pretty much the kill shot for me. So guys, let me know down in the comments below of what you thought about it. Chapter 2. How does it compare to Chapter 1 for you? And while you're there, hit that like and subscribe button. As of right now, I am not planning on doing the Welcome to Derry series. I'm uncommitted on it, okay? I'll just say that. I'm very much uncommitted on it. It could go either way. It really just depends on like how that first episode goes. That will determine whether or not I give that a full-fledged review series. But guys, again, thank you for joining me, and I'll catch y'all next time on another one. Laters.